Hi, welcome to the Crypto Republic. Before we begin today, if you're serious about staying ahead in this once-in-a-lifetime financial shift, make sure you like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the Crypto Republic. Hello, XRP Army, and welcome back to the Crypto Republic, your go-to channel for the latest energy updates and digital assets. Before we get started with today's business, make sure to smash that like button, ring that bell, and subscribe to the Crypto Republic, bringing you updates every day at noon and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just a reminder, this video is for educational purposes only. This is not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's a moment in every financial cycle where the noise gets so loud that people completely miss what actually matters. And right now, that moment is happening again. Because while social media is panicking, while crypto Twitter is arguing, while headlines are screaming about banks, control, and regulation, something much bigger just quietly clicked into place. And XRP holders honestly are not ready for what clarity just unlocked. In this video, I want to break down exactly why the very bill that has so many people in the industry so upset may end up being one of the most important tailwinds XRP has ever had. We're going to talk about why regulation always creates winners and losers, why Ripple's long-term strategy always suddenly makes sense, and why the price action we've been waiting for may arrive faster than most expect. Make sure you stick around for this whole video. And always, my rants are towards the end. Also, thank you to everyone who takes the time to like, subscribe, and share these videos. Your engagement helps get this information in front of more people. Your support allows me to keep bringing these deep dive, high-value insights to the crypto community. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's break it down. Well, the panic is a distraction. Right now, there's a very real fight happening in Washington around the crypto clarity bill. And I understand why emotions are high. One of the biggest complaints is that only banks will be allowed to offer yield on stablecoins. And immediately the narrative becomes, this is the banking cartel taking over crypto, always. But let me slow this down for a second, because this is where people completely miss the bigger picture. Yield on a stablecoin is not the foundation of crypto, ladies and gentlemen. It's not an innovation, and it's not what drives mass adoption. Is it annoying? Sure. Is it ideal? Probably not. But here's the real question. Is it worth throwing clarity in the trash over? Absolutely not. And history backs this up. Think about Roman roads. The Roman Empire didn't dominate the ancient world because it had the best weapons. It dominated because it built roads. Those roads weren't exciting. They weren't speculative. And at the time, a lot of people hated them. Merchants complained. Local powers complained. Old systems were disrupted. But once those roads existed, everything flowed through them. Trade, taxes, military logistics. Rome didn't just ask permission for commerce to happen, it standardized it. And regulation works the same way. It doesn't stop commerce, ladies and gentlemen. It organizes it always. And once standards exist, capital doesn't hesitate. It moves. Let's talk about Ripple understood the end game early, ladies and gentlemen. This is where Ripple enters the big picture. While much of the crypto industry spent years fighting regulators, mocking compliance, and pretending institutions would never matter, Ripple leaned in. They built for institutions. They engaged regulators. They prepared for a world where crypto plugs into the financial system instead of trying to burn it down. And for years, people laughed at what they said Ripple was too corporate. They said XRP wasn't real crypto. They said banks would never adopt blockchain. But now, look around. Banks are tokenizing assets. Governments are regulating, not banning. ETFs are pulling supply off the market. Suddenly, Ripple doesn't look slow. It looks early. Well, what clarity really does, ladies and gentlemen, this bill doesn't just add rules. It draws lines. It defines what a security, what a commodity, and who can offer what, under what framework. One provision matters more than people realize. Assets approved inside ETFs are treated as commodities. That means, because it places XRP on the same legal footing as Bitcoin and Ethereum, no special carve-outs, no regulatory gray zones, just clarity. And clarity is oxygen for institutional capital. Think about the U.S. interstate highway system, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't built by private companies alone. It took government standards, funding, coordination. And once those highways existed, private enterprise exploded. Walmart, FedEx, nationwide banking. None of that works without standardized infrastructure. Clarity is the highway blueprint, ladies and gentlemen. The XRP ledger is the payment highway. Institutions aren't the enemy. They're the freight. Let's talk about winners and losers. Winners and losers were always coming, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Regulation was always going to create winners and losers. The industry was never going to end with 3,000 tokens thriving. Capital doesn't work that way. Institutions don't work that way. They want liquidity, legal certainty, infrastructure. And this bill effectively says if you're large, compliant, liquid, and battle-tested, you're in. If you're not, you're probably not. That's not favoritism. That's how regulated markets function. And XRP sits firmly on the right side of the divide. Think of the early internet. Most early internet companies didn't survive, but the protocols did. TCP/IP didn't disappear. HTTP didn't disappear. The flashy websites came and went. The infrastructure stayed, ladies and gentlemen. XRP isn't a meme. It isn't hype. It isn't infrastructure. And regulation doesn't kill infrastructure. It selects it. Well, the long game, ladies and gentlemen, is finally catching up. For years, people said utility doesn't matter. Institutional money doesn't move price. But now, the meme cycles have burned out. NFT mania faded, and capital rotated back to fundamentals. Suddenly, utility matters again. Settlement matters. Liquidity matters. Regulation matters. This is why patience was required, ladies and gentlemen. Not because XRP was weak, but because the markets weren't ready. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be honest. There were moments where I sat back and thought, did I get this timing wrong? Or did the thesis go wrong? And that's where conviction is tested. That's where you have to have the Gucci clarity. That's where you have to stay frosty and get the Gucci clarity. Timing tests patience, ladies and gentlemen. Structure tests belief. And everything we're seeing now confirms the structure. Well, so much is happening, ladies and gentlemen, in the metals market. I don't even know where to begin. What we're seeing in silver will be written about in books. And I'm going to relate all this in. There's a short squeeze going on right now in silver, and it's massive. The U.S. with JP Morgan are effectively pushing China out of Latin America now. All the concentrate that China needs for their industrial base is now coming to the U.S., and they're not selling it to China. China needs this to grow. If anybody tells you that they know there's a top in place for silver, they're out of their minds. They're going to get cut up like sushi and carried out in a body bag because there is no top in place. I would say what we're seeing right now in the silver market is a classic example of one of Jesse Livermore's main theses of the accumulation barrel. You know, I'm going to go over that in our Patreon and have a whole special about that and what that looks like on a chart. Because right now, what's happening, there is no top in place. And JP Morgan and the U.S. are squeezing China out of Latin America, and they're squeezing them in the silver market. That's why scrap is priced so low. That's why the price of silver is so much more money over in China than it is in the U.S. With the margin requirements right now, what the CME is doing, I got off the phone, I told someone, you know, it's unbelievable. They're raising margin requirements on the higher price contracts and less on something new they're creating. That's like someone buying a pack of cigarettes, opening up the cigarettes and selling Lucy's. It's crazy. You know, it really, really is. And this is why having clarity is so important. Well, what we're seeing right now in the silver market reminds me of what happened during COVID. We called it like a venue squeeze. What was happening then is the refineries in northern Italy and Switzerland, they just shut down. So you couldn't get anything to market. So now, as China needs silver for their industrial base to grow, and they need concentrate, and they can't get access to it, and JP Morgan says, yeah, I can make money off this, and the U.S. wants China out of Latin America, they're going to squeeze them, and it's going to push up. You know, when you look at commodities, right? Stay with me, ladies and gentlemen. Certain commodities always have a backstop. Crude oil has OPEC. Gold has the BIS. So when you look at what's happening, right, and it's so unbelievable because you can see it happening, and certain people, you have to really look what's going on. The commodity war has begun, and it's going on right now, okay? And make no bones about it, at some point the price will drop. I'm not calling a top, and anyone who tries to call a top is out of their mind. Again, they're going to be cut up like sushi. But this is them being starved of what they need, and that is the price differential, okay? Refineries have plenty of silver in the U.S. They're just letting things transpire as it is, okay? And this is a war, make no doubts about it, right? Some of the other bigger things that no one's talking about in Venezuela was some of the mining outfits there. Some of the mine companies and what China was doing was they were pulling metals out of the ground in Venezuela, and then they were being reclassified as something else and shipped out of Colombia. Anybody who's in the mining industry, and I learned this very, very long ago from my mentors, what goes on, and I see it every day. What is shipped out from different places is not always what's in the bags after you bag and tag and write what's in it. That's why you have a lot of major places around the globe. They have no refineries. When you look at places like Indonesia, they don't have a lot of refineries. Why? Because people that are ripping things out of the ground would rather say they'll say A's in the ground and B's in the barrel. And when B gets to the refinery of another country, they'll step on it and make all the money, because when you refine it, you make more money. So what you see happening right here is unbelievable. And, there were reports out about Costco's, having some issues with their silver, because that's a loss leader. Costco gets silver, what they sell at one price, the price spikes higher, and you got people going in there buying as much as they can. They're losing money on that. Okay. And if you look at metals all around, and I'm going to bring this back into XRP, right? You can't buy gold in Thailand anymore. You have restrictions in India now with silver and gold. You also have, there was a report out in Japan. Japan's basically limiting what types of bars people can buy. It's a true wartime economic economies around the world. The public's just not paying attention to it. Where you basically you don't export metals any longer. You starve out your adversaries. So when you see this happening, it's coordination, right? And why I'll bring this back to XRP and Ripple, and my convictions are so strong because, again, we're going to go to print it to win it this year, and they're going to inflate assets. The financial system's changing because the world's at war from a commodity standpoint. I don't expect a lot of people to fully understand this. It took me a long time to understand commodities, going through different war cycles of everything that I learned from the best on the floor, on the exchanges, right? That's why I can't get off the phones, and that's why our videos come out later and later each day. I do apologize for that, right? I'm going to streamline that. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things happening. And, you have to ask yourself this. Remember I talked about cheap and change and infrastructure? The financial structure has to change. When they actually flip the cord, when they actually flip the switch, that's anybody's guess, but I believe that's coming sooner than later. And I really believe that the prices that people see here, and I'm not a price person. I like talking about the news and using the macro. And I like someone in the comment actually said why I said lose sight of land. Because the macro paints a story. Settlement paints a story. Because remember, the new map I put up there, it's not labeled wrong. It's labeled for everybody in the Patreon and who's in the other groups talking about to be 100% correct. Okay? Well, that's our new map. And I had to change everything because the bricks using the unit and the Cardano smart contract as opposed to commodities. Well, if they can't get commodities, that's not really going to work. At some point, their whole thesis of what they were going to do was they weren't taking advantage of what they couldn't price in, that there'd be military actions, that they would be cut off from their cheapest supply of oil and metals. So now you're waking up to a different world. By the time this year is over, we're going to look back on this video, what we're talking about right now with JP Morgan, the U.S., squeezing China out of Latin America, putting the squeeze on for the price of silver. And it's a short squeeze, right? And they're going to force the price of silver so high to the point where they'll gladly sell it to them at a price so much high, and then they'll collapse the price. And if anybody who's been in the commodity world long enough, you don't want to, certain banks that control the metals markets, you don't want to play with them. You're not going to survive that. You're just not going to. So what we see happening right now is unbelievable. Ripple's acquisition of G Treasury and the prime bank that they have and the FCM now, they have put together what anybody who is trading in a normal family office, they got about 5 guys in there working, right? I don't know if anybody really realizes how family offices work and the families they represent. They want speed, agility, right? They control most of the money for families. Speed and agility. If you can be nimble and you can be fast, you can take advantage of a lot of things. So right now, as this commodity super cycle begins, the financial reset has begun as well. Why I say that XRP to me is like crude oil, Crude oil is needed for everything. You just have to have it. And at the end of the day, where the world will go is going to be unbelievable. I'm not going to sell my XRP. I keep telling people this, and the people that we talk to in any capacity, they're not going to as well, because you don't have companies like that are hoarding XRP to create alpha from it for no reason. They see something. They don't buy infrastructure. They don't suck money out from one asset and put into another asset unless they see where the world is going, okay? The old rule book and the old guard, or the old financial guard, is over. There's a new world being built right now. Look at XRP, and this is what I feel is crude oil. When crude oil was found everywhere in the U.S., the oil barons came in and they bought people's ground, and they didn't tell them what was in it. They gave them pennies on the dollar. I believe letting go of XRP at these price points is no different than that. And you'll look back and be very disappointed, because where the world is going, it's quite unbelievable. And when supply shock happen because there's not enough of things around, that's what changes everything. And the world is so different today now over some of the moves that happened, Someone asked me about mining in Greenland, and I said I think mining would be easier on the moon than in Greenland because of ice and infrastructure. And I've been taking things out of the ground in some of the most austere regions for the last 20 years with some of the brightest minds from the biggest companies. I'm not going to mention their names, but at the end of the day, our phones haven't stopped ringing for good reasons, right? But again, I need everybody really to have this Gucci clarity here, and there's big reasons of why. Be careful right now. There's a rip current in all the financial markets. This isn't financial advice. This is what we're seeing. There's things changing and there's players moving, and you just have to stay frosty with Gucci clarity. That's all you got to do. Stick to your plan, stick to where you're going and why, and understand there's a lot at stake right here, right now. But it's truly unbelievable and amazing, right? So why I say XRP to me is like crude oil. Don't let go of your ticket and ownership for pennies on the dollar and turn around and be very, very upset as the utility evolves and the way to make alpha from it evolves. You don't have treasury companies buying as much as they can for reasons unless they understand it. Once these bills do get passed, they will be full alpha deriving platforms. And that's what it is. But again, be very, very careful, ladies and gentlemen. And, anybody who really wants to hear more about all this, please join our Patreon. Welcome all the new members. Thank you very much. And our membership channels are going to have some member-only videos going up. But we really touch on all this. And if you're looking for an edge about what's happening in the markets, do come and join us there, But it's unbelievable. Ladies and gentlemen, why XRP moves suddenly? XRP doesn't move gradually. It compresses. It frustrates. It goes quiet. And then it moves fast. Before the telegraph, markets move slowly because information moves slowly. Once the telegraph arrived, prices didn't creep, they jumped. Not because fundamentals changed overnight, but because friction disappeared. XRP removes settlement friction. Clarity removes regulatory friction. When both vanish at once, repricing feels instant. Let's talk about the supply story. Look at what's happening with ETFs. Supply is being absorbed. Liquidity is tightening. It doesn't take mass adoption. Even small, steady institutional flows change the entire market equation. Markets don't move emotionally, ladies and gentlemen. They move mechanically. I want to talk about the silver thesis. For years, silver investors were mocked until supply disappeared. And when that happened, price didn't rise slowly. It reset. Crypto works the same way. Think about what I just went over in that rant, about what's happening with the concentrate that China needs for the industrial base. Without that, that's why the price is skyrocketing. They can't get their hands on it again, right? Now you're playing in the deep end of the Mariana Trenches with the people that I'm talking to about. And I stand on the phone with these people all day, and they know me half my life because I worked for all these people in any capacity, which I don't talk about. But this is my analogy for this. Ladies and gentlemen, 2026 is a different phase. This isn't the speculative phase anymore. This is the infrastructure phase. And history is clear. Every financial revolution looks chaotic until the rules appear. Let's talk about Bretton Woods. After World War II, the world didn't reject finance. It reorganized it. Standards came first. Growth followed. The structure lasted decades. Crypto is entering its structured era, and XRP fits the phase perfectly. Ladies and gentlemen, so when people complain about clarity, understand what they're really reacting to. Change. And change always feels unfair to those who didn't prepare. But for those who did, This isn't the end of the story. It's the unlock. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate every one of you. If you made it this far, I really, really appreciate you. Your support allows me to keep bringing these deep dive, high-value insights to the crypto community. Ladies and gentlemen, my rants are towards the middle and the end of our videos from now on going forward. Silver is the canary in the coal mine for oil. Everybody on the floor, the Merc, what they would be saying right now, if we could still go to the floor, is no different than when you used to be able to see someone's face when they had the phone in their ear and we would see the charting and the long wicks on candles when the Merc moved to One North End. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget the look on people's faces, especially some of my mentors, when we would see the candle formations forming and the wicks would just be going higher. And you could almost sit there and say it's life imitating, price action. And that's one of the things I try to talk about, how life imitating price action, that you don't need a chartist to explain where the charts are really going if you understand the flow. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to have a great day. Always stay emotionless and watch XRP closely. This could be a defining moment. This content is for informational entertainment purposes only. It should not be taken as financial advice. Always do your own research and consult a licensed financial advisor before making investment decisions. Remember, the game is changing, and those who understand it first will benefit the most. Make sure you're on the right side of it. You have two choices. You can be like the crowd, reacting after the move, rationalizing why they missed it, telling themselves it'll never happen again, or you can be the one who saw behind the curtain, the one who understood the infrastructure shift, the ones who positioned early, not randomly, but intentionally. Because some moments in history are loud, but the ones that change everything are quiet, right up until the moment they're not. And this is one of those moments. Do not blink, because the world is distracting you with noise, while XRP continues developing behind the scenes and building momentum in the broader digital asset landscape. Stay sharp, stay informed, accumulate knowledge. Your move now will be remembered. This is not the end of the story. This is just the beginning. This opened your eyes. Smash the like button, ring the bell, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Turn on notifications, and most importantly, subscribe to the Crypto Republic. We break down the major global banking trends shaping digital assets today, giving you context, clarity, and research you can use. Don't just watch history happen. Stay informed, stay ahead, and stay in the Republic.